What if Jamaica bought back Air Jamaica? What would it cost? How would it work? And is it even realistic? To answer that, we need to look at the history, the math, the funding options, and finally, the hard truth about running an airline. We start with the history. Air Jamaica was more than just an airline. It was a source of national pride, carrying the Jamaican flag around the world. It symbolized independence, identity, and global presence. But along with that pride came financial trouble. Like many national carriers, Air Jamaica struggled with mounting losses. Operating an airline is expensive and complex, and the company faced repeated deficits year after year. By the 2000s, the situation was no longer sustainable. The government kept pouring money in to cover losses, but it wasn't enough. In 2010, the Jamaican government made the decision to divest. Air Jamaica's routes and operations were handed over to Caribbean Airlines, based in Trinidad and Tobago. By 2011, the agreement was formalized. Jamaica retained only about a 16% minority stake. Why did Jamaica sell? The answer is straightforward. The airline had become a financial drain. Losses kept piling up, and the government could not justify using taxpayer money to subsidize an airline that never seemed to turn the corner. During the divestment process, the government also had to cover outstanding obligations. Reports from that time show that the transition cost the state hundreds of millions of US dollars. Figures around 164 million to 200 million were cited for the divestment and transitional expenses. That was money spent to close the books, settle debts, and hand over operations smoothly. Now that we know the backstory, let's look at what buying back Air Jamaica would actually mean, because the answer depends on what exactly Jamaica would be buying. There are four main scenarios. The first scenario is the cheapest: buy back the brand and the route rights. This means Jamaica would own the Air Jamaica name and could reclaim certain route authorities, but the government wouldn't run the planes or employ the staff directly. Instead, it could license the brand to an operator. Think of it as owning the trademark and the flag, but letting someone else handle the day-to-day flights. The second scenario is operations with leased aircraft. In this model, Jamaica would acquire some operational rights, hire staff, and lease planes rather than buying them outright. Leasing makes entry cheaper and quicker. The airline could restart flights under the Air Jamaica banner, but it would need serious working capital to cover startup losses until revenue catches up. The third scenario is a full acquisition. This means Jamaica takes back everything: fleet, staff, maintenance bases, and liabilities. This is the most expensive because the government would not only have to pay for assets, but also take on debts, pension obligations, and integration costs. The fourth scenario is to start from scratch. Jamaica could set up a brand new airline, applying for licenses, buying or leasing planes, hiring crews, and building infrastructure. This is effectively a greenfield project, and while it gives full control, it's often the most expensive way forward. Now let's move to the math. What would each scenario cost in today's terms? Scenario A, brand and route rights only. Let's assume Jamaica buys back the Air Jamaica brand for about 30 million US dollars. Add another 20 million for 1 year of working capital and marketing to relaunch. That brings the total to $50 million. The math is simple: 30 plus 20 equals 50. Scenario B, operations with leased aircraft. Here, we estimate 100 million to acquire operational rights and basic assets. Add 80 million for 2 years of working capital and startup losses. Then add 20 million for lease deposits and initial payments on about 6 narrow-body aircraft. The total is $200 million. The math goes 100 plus 80 equals 180, add 20 and you get 200. Scenario C, full acquisition and recapitalization. Let's assume a buyout price of $300 million. Add $400 million to cover legacy liabilities and obligations. Then add another $400 million to replace part of the fleet and fund multi-year working capital. That totals $1.1 billion. The math is 300 plus 400 equals 700. Add another 400 and you reach 1.1 billion. These three examples show how wide the cost range can be. At the low end, you might spend around 50 million. At the high end, more than $1 billion. The spread is huge because it depends on what exactly Jamaica wants to own and how much risk it is willing to take. Why is the range so wide? Because airlines are not just about airplanes. They carry heavy legacy liabilities: pensions, staff costs, vendor contracts, and lease obligations. When Jamaica sold Air Jamaica in 2010, it had to spend hundreds of millions just to close the books. If the country tried to take the airline back now, it would face similar costs, plus the need to recapitalize the business. Now that we've looked at the math, the next question is, how could you make a fund such a buyback? The first option is straight sovereign financing. The government could issue a bond or use reserves. For example, a $500 million bond at 5.5% interest rate would cost about $27.5 million in annual interest. That's 500 million times 0.055, which equals 27.5. The problem is that this adds directly to national debt and affects the country's creditworthiness. The second option is a public-private partnership. In this model, the government partners with private investors. For instance, if the total cost is $400 million, the private side could take 60%, or $240 million, while the government puts in 40%, or $160 million. That way, the financial risk is shared. The third option is a concession or management contract. The government could own the brand and certain assets, but let an experienced global operator run the airline. The operator would collect a management fee and share in revenues. This requires less upfront money and reduces operational risk. The fourth option is selling a minority stake to a strategic partner. For example, if a foreign airline buys 49% for $200 million, that values the company at just over $400 million. The proceeds could go toward recapitalization. This brings in cash and expertise, but means Jamaica wouldn't have full control. The fifth option is sovereign-backed commercial loans or export credit financing for aircraft purchases. This would let Jamaica borrow at relatively low rates for hard assets like planes, but it still increases contingent liabilities. Another idea is a phased buyback. Jamaica could start small, just buying back the brand and a few routes for $50 million, and then expand only if the business proves viable. This lowers near-term risk. So funding is possible, but every option comes with trade-offs. Now let's talk about the challenges of actually running an airline. This is where things get tough. Airlines operate on razor-thin margins. They are highly sensitive to fuel prices, labor costs, and demand for travel. They are vulnerable to shocks like hurricanes, pandemics, or sudden drops in tourism. Caribbean carriers in particular have repeatedly faced losses due to small markets, high operating costs, and competition from larger airlines. Caribbean Airlines itself is a good example. After acquiring Air Jamaica, it also struggled with heavy losses. Integration was expensive, and the hoped-for efficiencies didn't materialize easily. This shows that buying an airline doesn't automatically solve the business model problem. Airlines are also prone to political pressure. A government-owned airline might be forced to run unprofitable routes for prestige or political reasons. Staffing decisions can also become political, leading to inefficiency. All these factors make the airline business one of the hardest industries in the world. So let's pull it together. Could Jamaica buy back Air Jamaica? In theory, yes. Funding could come from government bonds, private partnerships, or strategic investors. But no matter how it's financed, the risks are very real. Airlines burn cash quickly. They face global competition. They're subject to shocks that can wipe out years of profit. And in the Caribbean, even strong airlines like Caribbean Airlines face constant revenue struggles. So while it's fun to think about Jamaica buying back Air Jamaica, running an airline is incredibly complex and very expensive. National pride is important, but financial stability is even more important.